In the quiet, sprawling expanse of South Australian outback, a 4-year-old boy vanished into thin air. The search for Gus Lamont would expose not just the harshness of the landscape, but the profound and puzzling complexities of human behavior under pressure. This is a story where the silence speaks louder than the sirens, and the unanswered questions form a shadow over the facts. The disappearance of any child is a race against time, but the case of Gus Lamont began with a crucial and perplexing delay. He had been playing in the sand outside his family's remote homestead. His grandmother, Josie, was the adult in charge. It was around 5 p.m. on a Saturday when she last saw him. Yet, the official report to police was not made until over 3 hours later. In the critical first hours of a missing child case, every minute is precious, a window of opportunity for search teams to narrow a vast and daunting perimeter. This 3-hour gap is not merely a footnote in the timeline, it is a chasm of uncertainty that investigators and observers have struggled to reconcile. What transpires in the mind of a caregiver during such a period? The psychological landscape in those moments can be as complex and difficult to navigate as the physical one. Initial denial is a powerful and common human response to traumatic news. The mind can actively resist accepting a terrifying reality, constructing hopeful, simpler narratives to shield itself from the onset of panic. It is possible that Josie convinced herself that Gus had merely wandered to another part of the property, that he was playing a game, or that he would return at any moment, scolding herself for undue worry. This internal bargaining is a defense mechanism, but it carries a heavy cost when the clock is ticking. Alternatively, the delay could stem from a place of sheer fear of the repercussions, of the judgment, of the overwhelming scrutiny that would inevitably descend upon the family and herself. As the responsible caretaker, the weight of that responsibility, coupled with the sudden, shocking breach of that trust, can be paralyzing. The instinct might be to try and resolve the situation internally, to search alone, to avoid the monumental step of involving authorities, a step that makes the crisis undeniably public and real. There is also the matter of the other family members. Reports indicate that Gus's father, Joshua Lamont, was not immediately informed. The reasons for this second delay are equally murky. Was it a desire to not alarm him until there was certainty? Was it a reflection of complex family dynamics? The chain of communication, or the breakdown of it, in those first hours has become a central point of analysis. While there may be innocent, human explanations rooted in shock and confusion, such a significant deviation from the expected protocol of immediate action naturally raises questions that investigators must, and do, carefully consider. The gap remains a dark space in the narrative, a period where worry festered, trails grew cold, and a mystery began to deepen under the outback sun. In the days that followed Gus's disappearance, as police and volunteers scoured the land and the media spotlight intensified, the behavior of his grandmother, Josie, became a subject of quiet, intense discussion. To the outside observer, she presented an eerily calm demeanor, a stoicism that stood in stark contrast to the frantic energy of the search and the palpable anguish one would expect from a grandparent in such a situation. This calmness, while not evidence of anything in itself, is a psychological puzzle. Human beings have vastly different and deeply personal responses to extreme stress and grief. Some are consumed by visible, raw emotion, others retreat into a state of shock that manifests as detachment and quiet reserve. For Josie, a transgender woman who has undergone a significant and deeply personal life transition, her emotional responses may be shaped by experiences unique to her journey. Navigating a transition involves developing profound resilience in the face of societal scrutiny, personal challenge, and internal transformation. The coping mechanisms forged in such a crucible are not always visible or understandable to those on the outside. The calm she exhibited could be a well-honed shield, a way of maintaining control in a situation that is the epitome of chaos. It could be a form of emotional preservation, a necessary distancing to prevent being completely overwhelmed by a tragedy that is every caregiver's worst nightmare. However, this very composure, when a child is missing and presumed in grave danger, is inherently unsettling. It challenges our societal expectations of how grief should look. We anticipate tears, desperation, public appeals, a performance of anguish that assures us of the depth of a loved one's concern. When that performance is absent, it creates a cognitive dissonance that leads to suspicion. Is the calmness a sign of inner knowledge or acceptance of a fate the public is not yet aware of? Or is it simply the surface of a deep, private turmoil that she refuses to display for public consumption? Her brief public statements, urging volunteers to stay away and affirming that the family was still dealing with this, were delivered with a quiet firmness that some interpreted as defensive, others as merely exhausted. Understanding Josie's behavior requires a nuanced approach that considers her entire life story, not just the hours of this crisis. It forces us to question our own biases about emotional expression and to acknowledge that the map of human grief has many contours, some of which remain inscrutable to outsiders. The physical search for Gus Lamont was immense and heart-wrenching. Police, helicopters, and teams of volunteers combed the vast, rugged property and its surroundings. The initial hope was pinned on a single piece of potential evidence, a child's footprint. But that hope was quickly dashed when the print was dismissed as unrelated to Gus. Beyond that, the land yielded nothing, no shred of clothing, no discarded toy, no further tracks. The environment itself became an adversary. By day, the temperatures were searing, by night, they could plunge to near freezing. As days turned into a week, and then nearly 10 days, the official assessment grew grim. The possibility of a 4-year-old surviving such conditions alone dwindled. The police operation, out of necessity, shifted in tone and objective. It was no longer a rescue mission, it was a recovery operation. The official search was called off on October 17, a decision that acknowledged the bleak statistical reality but provided no closure. This lack of physical evidence is, in itself, a profound and troubling evidence of absence. In a landscape that appears open, the complete vanishing of a child feels not just tragic, but illogical. This void fueled skepticism from within the search efforts themselves. Experienced trackers and former emergency volunteers publicly questioned the focus of the operation. Some, like tracker Aaron Stewart, even cast doubt on the lone footprint, suggesting it could have been a decoy, a chilling possibility that introduces a layer of premeditation into the case. The official conclusion, that Gus likely succumbed to the elements, felt to many like an admission of defeat rather than an answer. It left a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. With no body, no clear crime scene, and no definitive proof of what happened, the case remains suspended in a state of agonizing uncertainty, its official file open but inactive, a cold case born from the hot Australian dust. Amidst the public drama of the search, the silence from one key figure was deafening, Gus's father, Joshua Lamont. While the boy's mother, Jess, was reportedly tending to the family's sheep at the time, and the grandmother, Josie, gave limited statements, Joshua maintained a complete and total media blackout. He refused all interviews, made no public appeals for information, and offered no statements on his son's disappearance. In the standard playbook of a missing child case, parental involvement is considered crucial. Public appeals humanize the victim, galvanize community support, and can sometimes jog the memory of a potential witness. A parent's visible desperation is not just expected, it is a tool in the investigative arsenal. Joshua's absence from this public narrative was, therefore, a conspicuous and deeply unusual choice. Psychologically, there are many reasons a person might choose such a path. Overwhelming grief can be a paralyzing, private experience. The media circus surrounding a tragedy can feel exploitative and alienating, and a refusal to participate can be a fierce act of protecting one's own shattered psyche. For some, the glare of the camera is an unbearable addition to an already unbearable pain. However, from an investigative standpoint, such silence is inherently puzzling. It can be interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as a form of avoidance. Does it stem from a place of guilt, whether rational or not? Could it be that Joshua harbors feelings of self-blame for not being present for the family's living arrangements that placed Gus in his grandmother's care that day? Or does the silence hint at something more complex within the family dynamics, a tension, a secret, or a shared understanding that public discourse could threaten? His residence, some 100 kilometers away in Balaclava, adds another layer. The physical distance from the homestead where Gus vanished could have contributed to a sense of detachment or powerlessness. But it does not fully explain the utter lack of a public face. This silence becomes a narrative in itself, a story told by the absence of words. It forces observers and investigators alike to wonder what thoughts, what fears, what knowledge is being held so tightly behind that wall of quiet. In the absence of his voice, Others have filled the space with their own theories, and his silence has, fairly or not, become one of the most debated elements of the entire case. The setting of this mystery adds to its profound bafflement. The property from which Gus disappeared is not a dense, impenetrable forest where a child could easily be lost from sight. It is described as vast, open, and isolated, with long sight lines. From certain vantage points, one should be able to see for miles. This topography makes the complete lack of trace evidence all the more confounding. In such an environment, how does a small boy simply dissolve? There are no crowds to get lost in, no complex urban infrastructure to navigate. The land itself should have been a witness. This paradox, an open landscape that somehow swallowed a child without a trace, fuels a deep-seated unease. It challenges our fundamental understanding of cause and effect. If the land is so visible, then his disappearance should also have been visible. The fact that it wasn't suggests possibilities that are difficult to confront. It leads the mind to search for explanations that defy the simple narrative of a child wandering off. This is the fertile ground where speculation grows wild. When logic and evidence provide no answers, the human imagination rushes in to fill the void. Some in the community and online began to entertain far-fetched theories involving wild animal attacks, abduction by persons unknown, or even, in the most extreme fringes, paranormal or extraterrestrial intervention. While these ideas are not grounded in any evidence and are often dismissed as irresponsible, they are a psychological symptom of the case's core unnerving nature. They represent a desperate attempt to impose a narrative, any narrative, on a situation that is fundamentally incomprehensible. The alternative, to accept that a child can vanish without a single clue in a seemingly transparent environment, is to acknowledge a terrifying randomness and fragility to our lives. The vastness of the land, instead of offering answers, became a mirror reflecting back our own confusion and fear. The official investigation into the disappearance of Gus Lamont has been formally closed, leaving behind a quiet that is anything but peaceful. It's a silence filled with the echoes of unanswered questions, a void that has settled over a small community and captivated a concerned nation. After countless hours, with search teams scouring the vast rural landscape, through dense thickets and across quiet, rolling fields, the earth has offered no clues, no definitive evidence to point toward what happened. In the absence of such physical proof, our attention turns, almost by necessity, to a far more complex terrain, the intricate world of human relationships and behavior. When the land gives up no secrets, we are often left to examine the people at the heart of the story, a difficult but inevitable process of seeking understanding where none seems to exist. From the outside looking in, the Lamont family represented a modern portrait of extended family care. Young Gus made his home primarily with his grandmother, Josie. Josie shared her life with her wife, Shannon, who is also, in a beautifully complex twist of family ties, Gus's biological grandmother. Gus's father, Joshua, lived a considerable distance away. For them, this was simply the structure of their lives, a practical, loving solution, the kind of arrangement that holds countless families together, particularly in rural areas where kinship networks form the bedrock of daily life. Yet, when a tragedy of this magnitude strikes, the most mundane details of a family's normal routine are placed under a microscope. The central, haunting question that now lingers is whether the key to this mystery might be found not in a hidden thicket or a forgotten well, but within the subtle, private dynamics of the family itself. Could there have been underlying strains, unspoken pressures, or private challenges that influenced the events of that day and the reactions that followed? To observers, and particularly to experts in human behavior, the family's conduct in the aftermath presented a complex and often puzzling picture. During public appeals, Josie's demeanor was notably calm, her composure seemingly unshaken in a way that some viewers found difficult to reconcile with the terrifying circumstances of a missing child. Then there is the matter of the 3-hour gap, a critical, unexplained window of time between when Gus was last seen and when authorities were officially notified. Similarly, the pronounced public silence from Gus's father, Joshua, who remained absent from the media campaigns, has become a subject of intense questioning in its own right. It is crucial to state clearly that these behaviors are not, in themselves, indicators of guilt. Human responses to extreme trauma and stress are as varied as people themselves. They are shaped by a lifetime of experiences, by individual personality, and by private coping mechanisms some of us might never understand. What an outsider perceives as calm might be shock or dissociation. A delay in reporting could stem from denial or a frantic, private search. A father's silence might be the only way he can contain a grief too profound for public display. The simple, routine decision to leave Gus in his grandmother's care that day, a decision made without a second thought on countless other days, became the tragic pivot point upon which everything turned. To explore these dynamics is not to assign blame, but to attempt to construct a holistic understanding of the human environment in which this unthinkable event occurred. As the active police investigation began to wind down, a natural and necessary conversation emerged about the methods employed in the search for answers. Some independent analysts and former investigators have quietly questioned whether the official inquiry was, perhaps, constrained by its own traditional framework. Did the search for a physical clue, a piece of clothing, a footprint, a scent for the dogs to follow, overshadow a deeper analysis of the human element? Without concrete proof of a crime, delving into a family's private world is a legally and ethically delicate endeavor. Law enforcement's powers are rightfully limited to protect civil liberties. However, when the physical evidence is absent, the behavior, statements, and very presence of the individuals closest to the incident become a primary source of information. A truly comprehensive investigative approach would seek to understand, with empathy and expertise, how each person's unique life journey might inform their reaction to a catastrophic event. For instance, Josie's personal history, including her gender transition, is a fundamental part of her identity. Understanding how such a profound personal journey might shape an individual's interaction with authority, their perception of responsibility, or their response to intense public scrutiny could provide invaluable context. The challenge for any law enforcement agency, but especially for those in rural areas with limited resources, is to balance strict protocol with the nuanced, specialized work of interpreting the vast and complicated spectrum of human behavior. This profound lack of closure has rippled outward, deeply affecting the public and the local community, and in doing so, has created a fractured response that reflects our universal struggle to process the inexplicable. For many, the case of Gus Lamont has become an object of intense, almost obsessive focus. In online forums and dedicated social media groups, thousands of amateur sleuths and concerned citizens meticulously analyze every released detail, poring over timelines and digital maps in a collective, desperate effort to find a pattern, a clue, anything that might lead to an answer. This engagement, while sometimes veering into problematic territory, often stems from a deep-seated desire for justice and a fundamental human need to resolve a painful uncertainty. Conversely, within the community closest to the family, among neighbors and townsfolk who feel the loss most acutely, a protective numbness has often taken hold. The constant, unresolved anguish is a heavy burden to bear. To speak of Gus at the local diner or the post office can become a social taboo, a conversation stopper that plunges everyone involved back into the helplessness of that first day. This emotional detachment is not a lack of caring, but a classic coping mechanism, a psychic shield against the unsettling, existential truth that sometimes, terrible things happen without reason, without a culprit, and without a satisfying explanation. This stark division, between the intensely engaged and the deliberately detached, creates a unique social ecosystem around the case, one that influences its longevity in the public eye and, in a way, mirrors the complex and divided emotional landscape the family itself must be navigating. In the end, the enduring mystery of Gus Lamont is defined less by what is known and more by the silence where answers ought to be. This void leads to inevitable, if uncomfortable, questions about whether there is information, known to the family, that has yet to be shared with investigators or the public. This line of inquiry is not an accusation of wrongdoing, but rather a sober acknowledgement of a simple, universal truth: all families, like all individuals, operate within private boundaries. They hold close their own understandings, their minor secrets, and their personal shames. What a family member may dismiss as an irrelevant private detail, a minor household accident forgotten in the panic, a tense phone call that seemed unimportant at the time, a private agreement between relatives, an investigator might see as the crucial piece that completes the puzzle. The collective pattern of public behavior, the guarded statements, the unexplained delays, the absence of a unified, vocal front pleading for answers, unintentionally fuels speculation. It does so not through any evidence of deliberate concealment, but through the palpable lack of a publicly cohesive and comprehensive narrative. The fate of Gus Lamont remains a haunting open question, a sorrowful chord left unresolved. The extensive search for him revealed a difficult truth that extends far beyond this single case, that the most challenging terrain to navigate is often not the physical wilderness, but the complex and deeply private geography of human relationships. It is the profound mystery of how the human heart and mind respond when the unthinkable occurs, and the agonizing search for clarity in a story that remains, for now, tragically unfinished.